Tai te mi tai pari ka wai maha nui ki te paupo o te raki haui ha pupu mai ka hoa tāwhiri mā te whakapuria ta o hoko te whenua pāki waitaha e a ti hei mauri ora. A te mi tuatahi mihi kina atua kaha rawa, a ho mai o kaha, ho mai o arawha ki a mātou e tēnei wā. Ko raki e tu iho nei ko papa tuanuku e takato, ko tānei kita ko takaro ki tai, a tēnei nā mihi nā atua. A ka huri au taka whakaro, a ki nā tini aitua, a kua wehe atu ki te pō, e nā mate, haere atura. Apati hono o tātou hono o rātou, kia rātou apati hono o tātou hono, tātou kia tātou te hongo ora, nā kai mahi, nā kai kauni hera, e te hāpore e mā takitaki nei, tēnā koutou, anau mai hara mai, ki tēnei hui, o tātou, kei raro i te tūnui o tēnei whari, ai roto i te rohi o nai tua huriri, ai no reira tēnā koutou. Aho atu i te rākau, Councillor Scott.
Kia ora. Great. Whakaturia mai ki te uru kahikatea, whakaturia mai ki uru taumatua. Katoa ona paki e katea, katoa ona kaupeka hia. Kia rangi whawha, kia aorangi. I whakamaru maru, I whakaruru hau, I te iwi e. Ui, uiro, tau mai te Māori. Homi e, ui e, yeah, kia ora. And welcome everybody and our visitors also to this meeting. I could ask if you want to take photos or videos within this meeting, please put your hand up and say now. Not adverse to that happening, but just let us know that may be happening. I understand we have a quorum, so we will start. Apologies. I have an apology from Councillor Crammell. Are there any other apologies? Yeah, and Councillor Diche. I think Councillor Diche may be absent this afternoon. So we'll put him down as an apology also. He was with us this morning. And Councillor East is absent without leave. So we'll expect him along soon, and we'll note when he arrives. Conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest? Public forums and deputations, we don't have any. Extraordinary and urgent business, there is none. We do not have any notices of motion. So moving to item 7.1, which is on page 10 of your agenda. That's the minutes of the last meeting on the 8th of February 2023. And we're just looking for anyone that's got any matters of clarification from those minutes. They're pretty straightforward. We'll put that to you. If there are no issues, we'll put that to you. So the motion is on the screen. If I've got to move it for that, please. Thank you, Councillor Pauling. Thank you, Councillor Korako. Is there any discussion? No discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, that's carried. So we'll move now to 8.1, the resolution status report. And that's on page 14. If there's any clarification required of this report, we have Catherine available to do that. Catherine.
Just as you were saying, Peter, very straightforward. Everything's either completed or in progress. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any matters that councillors like to raise regarding that? There being none, the resolution is on the screen in front of you. Could I have a mover for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Edge, seconded by Councillor Burns. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say no. That is carried. 8.2. 8.2 is a new agenda item, and it's a report from the chair. And I will speak to that. Substantially, there'll be a report from the chair at all of our committee meetings, and also all of our at our main council meetings. The reason for putting this item in the agenda is to give councillors the opportunity to speak to things that are of interest, but not yet fully uncovered, I guess, to the public. So it gives you an opportunity to do that. The The report is on page 18 of the agenda. And I'll take it that you have read that. And the key points are really that are noted there under 4, the frequency and reliability of public transport service, including missed trips and bus driver shortages, coverage of the public transport network, cruise ship patrons impacting in public transport service, bus exchange challenges, opportunities, and general safety concerns around the public transport network. Now, there are no staff involved in this, so this is an opportunity for discussion. If there's any discussion or any items there that you would like to talk about, please put your hand up and we'll go to them. Thank Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, so I suppose I'd quite like to just throw out into the public discussion here some of the things that I'm sort of picking up and hearing of concern to community members that I speak to or have been to see. One of the key things is around equity. So I know we have the Public Transport Futures programme, and that's really looking particularly at the higher frequency routes and working systematically around the city and the Greater Christchurch Partnership area to improve public transport services. But the questions I'm getting is how much is the equity aspect being taken into account? So we know we need higher frequency and reliability to enable more people to take the bus. And our focus is very much on enabling more people to use the service, and that, you know, the high frequency routes is a key part to that. And it's a lot of that's focused on, I think, fair to say, on commuters. But we have a growing population of elderly people. We have new like retirement village subdivisions coming in and so on. And elderly people who are finding themselves losing their licenses as they age are finding themselves feeling more and more unable to, isolated, unable to travel, and struggling to make what may seem to most of us as quite a small distance to get to your local bus stop. For them, it could actually be quite significant. And so I'm just really interested to know how much are we taking equity into consideration with our Public Transport Futures programme, and is there an opportunity still to, you know, revisit that in light of the changes we know we have through demographics and so on. And also areas of lower decile areas where we know people have maybe only one car in the family or even no car in the family. You know, that can leave people quite isolated. There are a few issues that have been raised through other aspects, which would be great to get a bit more knowledge around. How have we like ticked the box and got them sorted? So one would be the orbiter route, where we're ending up with, I'm noticing personally, and I'm hearing for others, there's a bit of a concentration of orbiter buses. You might get 2 in 7-minute gap or even less, and then a great big gap for the next, which makes it really difficult for us to really talk about our network and connectivity when actually you can't use it like a network. It's great when you get on the bus and you're on one bus and you get to your destination on the same bus, but if you're having to connect and move around, it's sort of, you know, a lot of our focus has been on making sure we're providing a network, not just a route that takes you from A to B in just on one bus. And then the ghost buses, I don't know if those, that was something, I don't know if that ever got resolved, like the ghost buses that were popping up on an app, which was really confusing and difficult for passengers. So that communicating changes in the short term, like day to day, changing the communications to passengers as they're using the system. Like, how well are we doing on that? Are we getting to resolving some of the issues like the ghost buses? And also, can we promote a particular app? So my personal preference has been transit app, but, you know, is there one that we can really promote and support and focus and communicate? Because I'm finding other people don't know about the best apps. And is that a role that we can take, or do we have to not, because it's a particular provider and we can't be seen to favour any one? I don't know how that goes. In terms of timetabling, there are routes that are less frequent but then don't connect very well in terms of the timetabling to the higher frequency routes. So will we have an opportunity to review some of those, and could we do that sooner than later? And then the cruise ships, of course, that's been a massive issue. And, you know, how I've seen that we have number 28 is going to be coming on stream quite soon. I think it's September this year, so that's great. It looks like through later in our papers that's got an absolute date for uplifting the service through that number 28. But in terms of the cruise ships, are we on track to resolve issues ready for next year? How have the tickets, day pass tickets been working? So these are just questions around things that we've heard are happening, but we don't necessarily hear back, and it's difficult to then communicate back to our communities about how well is it operating. So it'd be great to be kept informed of some of these things. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Since it's my report, I see that you're inadvertently looking to the other end of the room there. But we should be looking at other councillors for comment on what's already been said or any other new items that they want to bring to the table. And I know there is some stuff there around apps and communications, and I think, Craig, you particularly want to talk about that.
Kia ora. Thanks, Mihi. Thanks for raising the thing about the transit app. I'm most interested in how we get better communication out to our bus users, particularly if there are missed services, which we know has been happening. And I've got a little story about my son who's missed a couple, and he's rung me and goes, "Dad, what are you doing, mate? You know, sit around that table in the building, and you know, I'm missing my bus, and I can't get to school, and I have to sit in the rain." And so I asked our staff about what app is probably most preferred or best, and transit was the response. And so I've been using it and doing a bit of experimentation with it over the last couple of weeks, and working with my son to make sure he can see that the buses are coming, because there is a little GPS tracking thing, I believe, that shows the buses coming. And we actually went out in the car and tracked the buses down, and yes, they were exactly where they were meant to be, according to the little bus logos. So I think it's a really good tool to be able to use, particularly if people can be at home, they've got access to Wi-Fi at home, and they can check that the bus is actually coming before they get off to the bus stop, particularly if it's cold or raining. So, but one thing I was really keen to understand, which I don't know, maybe we can put this question to staff later, is can the app be used to broadcast messages? Because I know that it does alert you when you're on the app. It tells you if, when to go to the bus stop, etc. And could it be used to broadcast messages about cancelled services, for example, which would be really, really helpful for bus users. And I also know that it's great for users can also give their own feedback to other users about whether the bus is full, it's crowded, was it on time, etc., which I think is really helpful too. So I just think it's a great app, and I'd love to see if we've got, like supporting what Councillor Southwood has said about some promotion in the next while about the use of that app, the availability of the app, and then how can we work with that service to get messages out to users. So yeah, just I'd really like to see that. So, kia ora. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to move away from talking about public transport and talking about some of the general transport issues around Canterbury, and specifically the poor road design around Ashburton, where now it's not almost once a week we're having tailbacks that will stretch at least 9 kilometres back down State Highway 1 from Tynwald to Winslow because of poorly located and designed traffic lights, single bridge crossing across the Ashburton River. But we've just had a briefing on air quality and the effects that transport air quality is having on human health. Well, the people of Tynwald will have reasons to complain when they've got traffic sitting outside their gates for at least half an hour now, which is once a week and I think people seem to forget there's too much concentration on congestion and stuff in Christchurch, but in fact, because of I think incompetence by the road designers from Whakamutunga, we're now in a position where it's been pushed out into the provinces where it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, and that point's well made, but I think that probably should be in the chair's report for the Regional Transport Committee, because it's a structural issue that's affecting us.
But this is air quality, transport and urban development. So I would have thought this is the appropriate committee to sit in.
Beg to differ on that. Councillor Karakia.
Kia ora, Te Tiamana. Just to come back and support what Vicky was saying, Craig, and I actually had a look at the questions that prospective councillors answered to a reporter actually during the elections, and one of the common themes actually was about more development of the app around public transportation. So it looks like it's actually starting to hit fertile ground. Now, is Paul Bish actually on this? So I just want to talk because Paul was actually one of the ones that really did concentrate in that kind of questions that the reporter actually asked about, new innovation and all of that. So just to talk Paul as well. The other one is around the cruise ships. Now, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen any kind of negativity that's been over the last sort of kind of month or 6 weeks, and whether it was just a teething problem at the beginning of the cruise ship season. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I read the wrong newspapers, but in the community newspapers and that, it seems to have actually really settled down, and particularly after the Sail GP event. Whereas I think the Littletonians and particularly have actually accepted the fact is that either, they need to work together. So congratulations on that again, not only for the event, but also I think the cruise ship companies are we actually engaging more with the cruise ship companies around public transportation, about the cruise ship companies putting on more of their own, private transfers, and are we timing it properly then when it's kind of outside of the rush hour, so to speak, with our school kids, people going to work and all of that. But anyway, I think it's dissipated. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't think the concerns have 100% gone away, but we're in the last month of the cruise ship season in Christchurch. Anticipated that the conversations that we had prior to the cruise ships coming back to Littleton would not have created the issue that it has. There's a price differentiation between what the cruise ships buses cost and what PT cost, like $35 to two. I mean, who's going to take the $35 one? That opportunity to have that discussion is going to be taken up at the conclusion with all partners that are involved in that process. And I especially expect that the Littleton community will be involved in that, because they are the ones that are impacted. There's all sorts of things going on over there, but I think the PT issue based with cruise ships is the biggest one, and we will do something about that.
So what you're saying is that there's going to be a debrief, basically, and then, like a learning kind of perspective for next year. All right.
There will be. That's the advice that I've had, and I see some nodding people around the table who've got responsibility for that. So that will happen. Councillor Burns.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to reassure Councillor McKenzie, as a resident who lives on the Ring Road in Christchurch, that traffic congestion, air quality are just as much issues for urban dwellers. And I think that ensuring our public transport provides confidence to Greater Christchurch and Timaru is essential. Thank you. No question.
In support of, thank you, Councillor Burns. In support of, I guess, of Councillor McKenzie, the topic of the Ashburton Bridge was on the Otago Regional Transport Committee's agenda for something that needs to be fixed in the South Island, because the connectivity, of course, of that bridge is important. And I can assure you that if you don't get out of here by 1 o'clock tomorrow, it's going to take you like 45 minutes to get through Ashburton tomorrow afternoon. I look forward to that. We'll go the other way, actually. Are there any other comments? Councillor Swiggs, you've got a comment you want to bring forward? Councillor Davies?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. It has been a big constituency issue for me. I'm getting quite a lot of feedback about it, and it's a shame we didn't have anyone making a forum today, but hopefully they will come in the future to express their experiences. But just in regards to the driver of this main issue being the driver shortage, I did a bit of reading internationally what's happening, and the International Road Transport Union says that the EU could be missing some 100,000 bus and coach drivers soon due to this global shortage. It would hamper essential mobility services and put a big dent in the EU's CO2 emissions reduction ambitions, as it would lead to less collective mobility. So just, we have a domestic issue, it's a global issue, and it's not going anywhere.
I guess that's it's well made. The point's well made, and both Councillor Southworth and Councillor Davies have been hot on this here. And the reliability, frequency and reliability are those two things that make this work. We've had to change that. It's a 3-month process, and we're hoping that we will get through that. It seems to be slowly working our way out of that. So just hopefully that we can keep an eye on that. But your points are noted. Look, I don't think there's much more discussion required here. So could I have someone Councillor Ward, sorry. You were going to speak. Sorry, Nick.
Just to say that the Timaru My Way service has been used more and more and the numbers are going up. So that's, I guess, encouraging to see Timaru.
Good news.
But the bad thing in Timaru is that we've had the installation of another set of traffic lights and we're starting to have the same problem as Ashburton. But due to shopping complex development on the bay, hill.
That's a point well made. And at us ongoing discussions with Whakatahi in terms of trying to alleviate some of the issues that we have here in Christchurch are about what can we do with a My Way type service in Christchurch. Is that a possibility? We haven't had any great pushback on that. So hopefully in this next 6 months or so, we'll be able to come up with some sort of solution. I think the hardest thing about saying we're going to do anything about that is where would you do it? You know, where would you do it in Christchurch? The east is probably somewhere that would be deserving because under the Greater Christchurch Partnership mass rapid transport, the east looks like it could miss out. So anyway, that's for further discussion at a further time and another time. So thank you for your discussion, councillors. Can I move to that that recommendation there and get someone to move that? Thank you, Councillor Ward, seconded by Councillor Robinson. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, that's carried. So we'll move on to 8.3. And I think Paul, can you in the room, Paul? Yep. So Paul's going to introduce this item. Paul's the Principal Implementation Advisor for our Air Winter Program, and also welcome Brian Reeve, who's a lead in this area.
Kia ora, councillors. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm here to present the Clean Air Work Programme update for 2023, including the winter work programme. I'll take the paper as read, but I would like to note the following key points. Firstly, in the lead up to winter 2023, we're undertaking a proactive campaign across the region to inform homeowners of expiring wood burners. Secondly, the Environment Canterbury will continue to implement a temporary waiver scheme to provide leniency for the elderly and those with serious health issues. Thirdly, we'll continue to respond to smoky chimney complaints across the region to provide education and better burning advice, as well as advice on replacing expiring burners. And finally, the Warmer Cheaper campaign will be operating region-wide and through the ECAN website for advice on better burning techniques, using the right fuels, and encouragement to homeowners to check the expiry dates of their wood burners. So coming back to the recommendation, you'll find that on page 20 of the agenda pack. And the recommendation is that the Transport, Urban Development and Air Quality Committee receives the Clean Air Winter Work Programme 2023 update on the progress made in addressing winter air quality in Canterbury polluted airsheds, and notes the initiatives underway to address expiring wood burners. So we're happy.
Sorry, Paul. I've cut you off. Oh, can you repeat that? Because I've cut you off. I took your button. You need to push your button.
Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions through you, Mr. Chair. I'll also note that we have Brian Reeves with us today, who's the Service Delivery Manager and the Programme Lead for the Air Programme, and we can answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Paul. Genevieve. And then
just a quick question about the expiry of wood burners again. How can somebody, a homeowner or renter, look up the information? Is it online as part of the building consent, or is there a way of looking at the unit itself to see, I don't know, manufacturer's expiry? Or
yeah, we have a solid fuel burner database which is accessible through the Environment Canterbury website, and that has information on the wood burner expiry. That information comes from building permit data that we get from the district councils.
Yeah, I've got three questions. So firstly, with regards to the 700 properties in Christchurch and 400 in Kaiapoi that are being, those will be ones within our airshed. So because those are the only ones that have a consent around the wood burners and then a requirement to go to ultra low. But in terms of letters to do with burning better or information around burning better, does that go to everybody? Because that has that's a broad topic that can have an improvement, presumably, regardless of which wood burner you're in, and also has an impact on people's ability to, the cost of running these things as well, presumably has a benefit on that.
Yeah, the Warmer Cheaper campaign is our avenue for providing advice on better burning, and that's really around using your burner more efficiently, using dry wood, and to heat your home more effectively. So that's not a targeted campaign. That's a social media and a print media campaign and information on our website. So that's to the population generally across Canterbury. But yeah, the mail outs to people with expired and expiring burners, that's targeted within our clean air zones.
Then in terms of, so we've got leniency program for elderly and households with serious health issues. I'm just wondering about in terms of families and people through this sort of cost of living crisis. Like, it's not just elderly or people with serious health issues that are actually having real problems with finance. I remember talking to a midwife who was telling me she knew someone who'd had a newborn baby she visited, and they were literally burning their picket fence from their yard to get their house warm enough for the newborn. So, there's families outside of this small pool that are having problems. So are we keeping a check on that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we've been very conscious of in undertaking this proactive work in the current financial climate. And that's why we really want to make sure that we have an accessible subsidy scheme to help low-income households to swap out their burners. We do have discretion around leniency and and how we use that waiver approach. So it's case by case, but typically so far it's been used mostly for elderly people or with serious health conditions.
So, sorry, Vicky, I was just going to respond to that also. So in the Timaru example and the Waimate example, where we had two really quite bad air sheds when we first started, and we had a couple of meetings with residents, and the accusation coming from the community was that their old ladies wrapped up in eiderlowns at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because they couldn't afford to start their fire. We responded to that by going to senior citizens and offering a pathway for the consenting people and the smoke spotters and those sorts of people, just sort of have what would you call it, Brian, like a yellow card or something for them, so that they could, or a green card maybe it was, so that they could hold that up. And we were seen as being I won't say the bad words, having sort of thug tactics, if you like, against smoke. But the only time that we can do anything, if you've got a burner and it's not compliant, the only time it's not compliant is when it sticks smoke out the chimney. Right, so we can't do anything about it other than when you light it and the smoke comes out. Do you want to make comment on that, Brian?
I do, and it's a fine line for us as far as treating a line between being sheriff and social worker. So we're extremely mindful of people's personal circumstances. There are a range of enforcement options available to us, and ones that to this date we haven't availed ourselves of. There are other regional councils who will throw out abatement notices because they've been through a 3-year perhaps period of bedding in where they've had enough, and they've made it perfectly clear to residents, particularly in the Bay of Plenty, that enough's enough, and they will start infringing people and they will start abating people. As far as I'm aware, we haven't done that. Okay, but there will come a time when the circumstances conspire against that person that should be the right approach. But at this point in time, we're extremely mindful, as Chair Scott has alluded to, of not to be making life more difficult for people whose life is difficult already.
Really good to hear, and it is important, isn't it? Because ultimately everybody's also affected by poor air quality, so that's really important. So I get the final question really is around so we've sort of parked the review of the subsidy scheme and so on, which was planned, and because we can see how we can maybe integrate, we need to take into consideration some of the other things that are happening, and so that makes sense, except that our long-term plan is when the opportunities come, in particular for funding changes. And so are we going to, if we're holding out for something to enable us to move on, are we going to miss the boat in terms of the next funding sort of round of consideration? So it's just, you know, how are you managing that? And are we, how are we managing?
Yeah, I think it is, through Mr. Chair. It's certainly something we need to consider for the next long-term plan. We're operating the subsidy scheme under similar criteria, but we can certainly look for opportunities to expand that scheme for the next LTB.
Thanks, Stuart. Just a clarification for me really is related to page 22, item 19, where some letters were sent to around 400 homeowners with expired burners in Kaiapoi and Rangiora. I got a letter suggesting that my wood burner was expired, but I actually replaced it in 2015. And I kind of relate to the item 35 on page 24, which talks about the relationship of territorial authorities being a really good issue in terms of that they issue the building consents. They also issue the code compliance certificate once it's all installed. But it seems that the information isn't a two-way thing and that they're not then passing that information on to Environment Canterbury. And I kind of, on getting back to item 20, it's suggested that that we expect some householders to contact Environment Canterbury, but I would have thought the best, most reliable way of doing it is for the territorial authorities to pass on the certificate, code compliance certificate. Is that something that you think you might talk to them about and see if they can improve their information transfer to us?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. We do receive information from the district councils on building consents that have been issued. So that's what populates the information in our solid pure burner database. But we do acknowledge there may be errors there. There might be information that we haven't updated. Particularly if somebody's replaced a burner with a heat pump, for example, we won't know about that. We only get information about building permits that have been received. So in those letters that we do send out to households, we do acknowledge that the information we have may not be correct, and we ask homeowners to contact us so we can correct that. So we do try and do the quality assurance as best we can before we send out those letters.
Yeah, that's a pretty difficult space because we got into the same issue in Timaru where the Timaru District Council were reluctant to get involved in looking at limbs where burners were expired. The reason that we don't want to get in there is the insurance issues and those sorts of things by saying, and as I said before, a burner is only non-compliant to us when the smoke comes out the chimney and affects the air quality. So we don't want to, we don't want to get past we don't want to be Father Christmas here. We don't want to be coming down the chimney at the log burner. So we just need to stay in our space here. So the education component of this is really quite important, and I think it's been really quite good up till now. And our relationships, our improving relationships with the TAs. I think the highlight, the point that Vicky, that Councillor Southworth made, is that during our LTP considerations, if the NESAC does change to 2.5, and we look at the air quality essentially going to be worse than what it is under 10, then we need to spend a bit more money to get this done. And you know, the recognition that it's the number one killer in the world, health killer in the world, is air quality, that we need to take note of that. I think we're in a good space, but we just need to keep paying attention. If there's no more clarity sought from Paul and Brian, you guys can step back and we can put the motion or the recommendation to the committee, which is on the screen. Because I have a move for that, please. Thank you, Councillor Swiggs. Thank you, Councillor Sunkel. Is there any discussion? There being no discussion, I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, that's carried. So thank you for that, and thank you for that, which we're going to spend a bit more time, I think, to talk about this issue as we go forward, and especially as we get into winter and we can look at what's going on in those areas. So 8.4 here. Yeah, Rob? Oh. Understanding attitudes about transport emissions in Canterbury. Got the experts here. Good to see you back in the chamber. It's always exciting to see you here, Carl. So, Carl and James. James is from Jamali. Carl's from Research First. Carl?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Tēnā koutou, everybody. Yes, we are here to talk about some research that we did for you last year. Some really interesting research about what do residents think about how we reduce transport emissions. We did this research a while ago, so when I talk about it, I feel like you've already all heard about it. Do you want to introduce? Do you want to say anything, Claire? Sorry. So,
No.
all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're good to go.
Okay, thank you. So this piece of research is Canterbury wide, and it involved three things. It involved a secondary source analysis. So we went and read a whole lot of stuff about transport emissions and how to reduce transport emissions. There's a large survey of residents as well, but the bit that's innovative is we impaneled the community in Darfield so we could have conversations with them about their transport behaviour and what may or may not work to reduce their transport, their emissions. So that enables us not just to use retrospective or prospective data gathering, but actually to collect it in real time. We're really excited about that. Great news is for you guys, there is widespread recognition of the need to change transport. We know that transport is a significant contributor to emissions. Mm-hmm. We know that emissions are a significant contributor to air quality. So if you look, all that matters here is that you look at the size of the green and grey bars and you have a look at the black and the red. The black and the red are people who disagree. Green and the grey are people who agree. And what you see is significant majority of people agreeing that we need to reduce transport emissions. The businesses need to do, the residents need to do more, the governments need to do more. So that argument's been won. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But the bit that will alarm you and alarmed us is that individuals have much less propensity to change their behaviour. So there's widespread recognition there's a problem, and then what we actually do about that problem becomes really interesting. Again, you don't need to worry about what these labels are, just worry about, look at the size of the green and the red bars. Essentially what you get at the top is you get about half of the people agreeing that they're probably somewhat likely to change, and down the bottom you get a majority of people saying pretty unlikely that we're going to change our transport behaviour around work. So we're most likely to change around the things which are personal and moving people around. Much harder for us to do it around those predictable daily trips. What we use as a twofold approach that I'm sure it's no surprise to any of you that have been in policy for a long time: structure and agency. What can we change at an infrastructure level? What can we change at the policy lever? What can we change in terms of our own behaviour? And what you see is people saying, yep, we absolutely need to make change at both ends. But lots of people in the community saying, I'm already doing everything I can realistically. And so I need more support. We need to change the settings so that I can actually do what I need to do to reduce my transport behaviours, reduce emissions. And there's a really nice model that Claire introduced us to from MOT that looks at, so if that's the case, let's think about how do we avoid or reduce our travel plans? How can we shift some of our travel to more effective modes? And then how do we simply improve our travel? And if we use this lens, what you see is that everybody thinks we need more public transport. That'll be absolutely no surprise to you guys. But at the same time, there's a groundswell for how do we make lower emissions or zero emission cars more attractive? And only then do you see people saying, and let's look at those active transport options as well, like cycling. So give us more access to public transport, make it easier for us to get into EVs and hybrids, and also give me more active transport modes. And the rest of these, it's just a long tail. But you can see that what's not so popular are things like carpooling, coercing people not to use their cars through taxes and other things. Apps don't really work. And a lot of people in Canterbury, as we'll come back to in a minute, aren't particularly supportive of denser communities. The thing about this, though, the reason this piece of research is really useful for you guys is it reinforces what you already know. You need tailored solutions to the local needs. So what's going to work in the urban areas in Canterbury won't work in the rural areas. You need a different approach for rural areas than you do for urban areas. And again, you don't need to read any of this, but if you just, here's the overall data, right? So what you're seeing here are people saying, do we have enough of bike lanes, bus lanes, cycleways, public transport in your area? And you can see we bounce around. But here's the important part. When you split that, and I'm sorry about all the numbers on the table. All you need to look at are the columns on the right. When you split that between rural and urban, you see distinct differences. So people in towns and cities are much more likely to say, we've got enough bus lanes, we've got enough bike lanes. People in rural communities are much more likely to say we need more bike lanes, we need more separated cycleways, and we need much more public transport. So if you look at that one that says public transport available in your area, mean score amongst the towns and the cities is 1.8. The mean scores in the rural areas is 1.7. So that's the part that we're really interested in. So then if we think about what do the people in the rural areas tell us, what are they looking for in order to be able to reduce their transport emissions? The first thing they want is they want to think about how can we create a world where they just don't have to get in their cars and travel. So what can we do about taking services that they have to travel to and putting them closer to them? And the obvious one's the supermarket, right? If you live in some very rural parts of Canterbury, you're not going to have a supermarket nearby. You need to get in your car and get to the supermarket. So how do we get those things to them? How do we stop them traveling to work every day? Is by we put better internet into those regions. If you want people to reduce their travel, then make it easier for them to work from home. And the way you make it easier to work from home is you make sure they have fast, reliable internet. So you can see that something like supporting fast, reliable internet into smaller settlements in the regions might have an impact on transport emissions. Then if you talk about shift, I'm in the wrong way. If you talk about shifting, people in rural areas want to be able to walk and they want to be able to cycle some of the time, but at the moment they're really clear that their roads simply aren't safe enough. There isn't enough lighting, there often isn't a divided footpath, cycling isn't particularly safe. Some places there's nowhere to park a bike if you do a cycle into town. So thinking about how do you actually enable different ways of what are the barriers towards that thing, making people feel safe, making it seem obvious, and making it available to them. And then how do you actually enable them to make those trips, say from Darfield, where it is, into Christchurch when they need to travel for other things, see a specialist, a big shopping trip. Again, how do we get public transport connectivity from those places into Christchurch so they don't have to bring their cars? And then finally, so obviously people tell you we need better local services so we don't have to travel too far. Obviously that too is spelt wrong. And then if you want to talk about what can we improve, if you want people who live in rural areas to change the kind of vehicles they own, you've got to make EVs suitable for people in rural areas. We've heard lots of things about how do we have EVs that we can tow with? How do we have EVs that work in the cold? How do we have EVs that will go up hills? Once we've got those, how do we make sure that we've got infrastructure to support them in the areas? Can we think about a shared EV model? And I really like this. This is one of the people in the community said, just make an EV that's supposed to work in a commercial in a rural setting, because the current vehicles really don't. So rural setting, lots we can do. Urban areas, of course, the answers are a little bit different. In urban areas, what people say is, one of the ways that we can reduce our need to travel or even avoid our need to travel is by looking at urban form. So intensification can actually support us traveling less. Can we live closer to work? Can we live closer to where we shop? Can we have genuinely walkable neighborhoods? And I'm sure you've all tried. Have you all tried using Walk Score on your own house? There's a website called walkscore.com. When you get home, put your address in it. It will tell you how walkable your neighborhood is. You will not be surprised to hear the new neighborhoods we're building in Christchurch in particular have terrible walk scores, but the old neighborhoods have terrific ones, right? So how walkable is your neighborhood? And then the other thing is, if you don't own commercial property in the CBD, it's really attractive to actually work from home. So what can we do to enable people to work from home? Not all of the time, but some of the time. Let's just remove their need to travel. And then in terms of shifting, the people in the urban environment said to us, let's actually double down on cycling. Given that people aren't willingly giving up their cars, let's make it more difficult for people to use cars through traffic calming, through all of those measures. Make sure that we can provide more information. I heard you talking about the bus app, but much more information about how we can engage with the systems we've got. Work with the employers, since lots of employers seem to be calling people back to the office. seems to be a global phenomenon. They're working in the opposite direction to what you're working. How can you work together to come to some sort of arrangement about that? And clearly more PT, and you've talked about frequency, so you know that. In terms of, and then, so people are saying promote the bike lanes, promote bike parking, promote places where you've got enough showers. So if you do bike, you can clean up before you jump on your Zoom. And then work with the businesses so they incentivize their staff to use active transport, to use bikes, to use public transport rather than cars. And then finally, when we move to improve, it's the same thing. If EVs are going to be the answer, or if plug-in hybrids are going to be the answer, how do we get more access to them? How do we make them cheaper? How do we make the infrastructure of that available to more people? And think about the equity about that as well. At the moment, EVs tend to be a premium product, but how do we make EV access available to other people? And then, of course, people want to see improved PT and cycle options. The thing about this research, and I was talking to Rod Carr when we finished it last year, and what he said is, we don't need any more science about this stuff. The science is really clear, right? What we now need to do is change people's behavior, which means you're actually in the behavior change business. And that's a huge problem for all of us, right? Because people are wonderful and weird. And I love this quote from Isaac Newton. When he lost all his money in the South Sea bubble, he famously said, I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people, right? The good news is all of the officers that work in your organizations will know that there are some really good models now available for behavior change. And the one that everybody points to in the policy world is a thing called the EAST framework. So, which is, I thought you would like that, Councillor East. You'll be surprised to know it's an acronym for easy, attractive, social, and timely. But that's exactly the point. How do you make the behavior you want to see easy? How do you reduce the friction of the behavior you want to see? How do you make it seem attractive? How do you demonstrate to people that other people are doing it? That's the social element. And how do you get them at the point they're making the decision? At the danger of telling you guys how to suck eggs, the other great behavior change framework acronym is COMB, which tells you that in order to change behavior, which is the B, people have to have the capability, the opportunity, and the motivation. And the reason that behavior change projects fail, because we double down on motivation. We go immediately for the motivation and we forget about, does that person have the opportunity to exhibit the behavior we want, and do they have the capability? This great bit of work that Claire's led tells you that in the rural area in particular, people simply don't have the capability or opportunity to reduce their transport emissions. I'm going to wrap up quickly. Again, at the danger of telling you guys how to suck eggs, every organization and every idea and policy world fits inside what's called an Overton window. And an Overton window sets the limit around ideas that we think are sensible and acceptable, which means that outside of those ideas, there are other ideas, which at the moment you might think are radical or even unthinkable. But the real behavior change exists at those margins. And so what the research is encouraging you to do, in fact, what the research is giving you permission to do, is actually to start thinking about some more radical interventions. And then I just want to finish with this. A lot of the people we're working with around sustainability, we've been pointing them to this book by Roman Krishnarik, if you don't know it, called The Good Ancestor. And all you need to know about this book is told in the subtitle, which is how the hell do we do long-term thinking in a short-term world? And so Krishnarik does a great job of diagnosing how we've got sucked into thinking in a short-term way. It gives us some tools to think long-term. And he has two that I'm going to leave you with. One is think hard about a legacy mindset. So what is it that all of us can leave behind for our communities, for our professions, for our city, that will be a legacy to the decisions we make? And then the other one I really like is, what are our cathedral projects? What are the things that we can work on that we will never see finished in our lifetime that will actually make the world a better place? That's all I want to say.
Awesome.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. I mean, cathedral thinking is interesting, isn't it, in this day and age? Because you read about when they built cathedrals, it's like 100-year, 200-year project. I've got a question of you. So, do we overly complicate behaviour change by not Do we overly complicate behaviour change in this space by not slicing up the demographic properly. I mean, the people under 20, are they more conducive to change, or you know, I mean, people over 60, the old buggers like me, I mean, they don't want to change sometimes.
I can't comment on how regional councils and local councils deal with behaviour change, but in general, you would focus on the people that have a propensity to change. So if you remember those bar graphs we put up, there were a small number of people who were red and black, right? They're never going to change, or if they're going to change, they're going to change last. So we wouldn't even think about doubling down on those people. The idea is how do you accentuate the people that are already on side, and how do you move the people who are neutral to being on side? That's your challenge. And who those people are, by age or by ethnicity or by location or income, is a question for your analysts. But the thing to do is think about their attitudes and their behaviour and focus on the ones that you can change most readily.
When we looked at our behaviour change program for the Clean Air program and the Warmer Cheaper, it wasn't tailored because it was a general population based. It wasn't tailored to a specific age or demographic. It was a broad brush campaign. And I think the context and what the research is showing in transport emissions is that it's a general population approach. It's not because of the percentages are just so high. But at this stage, we're still at the policy development in terms of the policies in the RLTP will reflect this research. We're not into the details of the specific solutions for behaviour change.
But the other complexity is, I mean, the international research shows that obviously we're not talking about getting people out of their cars and onto a bus or cycle every day and every trip. You know, we just need you to change some of your trips to start with. So that's about how do you plan somebody's week of transport. So it's not as if we're trying to make raving advocates out of everybody. We just need everybody to move their behaviour somewhat, at least to start.
Depending on IPCC reports, I guess.
Well, kia ora. Thank you for that overview. I thought Be a Good Ancestor is an interesting one, particularly from where we come from, talking about our tipuna. Hey, last year at one of the council meetings, it was the last one of the year, I think it was last year, and we had the chair of the Horswell Community Board, I think he was, that presented to us in a submission. So with all of the work that you've done with this research document, did you ever actually look through any of those submissions? Because a big part of what you were saying actually mirrored exactly what this gentleman was saying, and particularly around development. Yeah, and actually no one talks the developer. There seems to be a huge sort of misstep there, where the developer, the public transportation, you know, suppliers and all that, a complete mismatch. So, I mean, answer my question.
Yeah, well, through you, Mr. Chairman, no, we didn't, because this bit of work was completed in September or October.
Yes.
So long ago. Yeah.
So, and I think because it was I think that there was a survey that went out that was then based on assuring we had population representation across that survey, and in particular making sure that that the smaller districts, that we did a quite deep into the communities in those smaller districts, because in Christchurch there's been a lot of research in those kind of urban areas and less for rural communities in terms of transport emissions reduction.
Okay, because what we heard from that gentleman was a heck of a lot of frustration, and particularly around probably all that sort of combination of work that you say has been done, but it actually hasn't been picked up. That was his frustration. Anyway, so
the answer is no, but it sounds like it's a rich resource, but it highlights, doesn't it, the complexity of the challenge in front of you, because particularly we've heard about the cost of living crisis, and we know that housing affordability is a problem. If people are choosing houses on the basis of affordability, and that's then impacting their ability to move around in a way they like, that's a difficult choice for them to have to make.
I'm going to go till 5 past on this subject, and we've got Grant, Dion, Ian, and Vicky. We'll keep going. We'll keep going. No, we're going to keep going till 5 past. You've got some more questions. You're not getting off that lightly, actually.
I've got a question, or just an observation as well, really. On page 34, figure 4, you have those bars, and as you've already indicated, the lowest kind of level of change that people are prepared to accept is to do with intensification. And that's contrary to the government's approach in terms of urban development and urban intensification as a means, as a directive, if you like, to change the way that we live, to improve our mode of transport and all of those, and achieve all those things that you're talking about. So on your first page there, a systemic change is required, is fantastic. I mean, it's a really good report. And those issues about the question of motivation. So people were sort of more concerned about the cost of public transport or better pricing for electric vehicles, but it's actually where they live. And perhaps an issue is, I don't know what you feel, is do they understand about the, well, it was picked up in your rural thing, but it equally applies to the urban, where people live in an urban environment, the proximity to services like the shops, like those other things, their neighbourhoods, their schools. If you're living in a rural sector, you don't have those kind of things quite at hand. Yeah, I agree. All I'm saying is I'm agreeing with what you're saying is the behavioural change is multi-dimensional, and it's going to take a long time to change. The New Zealanders' approach to housing choice, which is always this vision of a quarter-acre section with a bit of grass around it that you mow every weekend.
Yeah, I mean, again, what we're demonstrating is the complexity of the issue that you have in front of you. And if all you're trying to do is think through a transport lens, you will end up, again, running up against issues of affordability, of equity, of access to services. And you're grappling with that, I understand that.
Look, in the, I don't think we're going to have enough time to ask everything, because I think a really good report is when you actually have more questions that you can't answer just by the by talking. But one thing that I did notice here is in this report there's a lot of mention of subsidies and incentives for people to get into electric vehicles and things like that. And I don't know the answers to this, and it's not something I don't think you can answer as well. But we have to be. Is our model of subsidising, say, healthcare and all of those, or not subsidising, but socialising healthcare and all of these other things, actually taking away from the real impact of what, these transport decisions that we're making, and actually moving people into the long-term future? So, I mean, especially given the questions that we had earlier today, the presentation we had earlier today about the health and the money, we're talking about billions of dollars, and then we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars to do everything else. So where's the disconnect is probably where I'm thinking.
That's exactly was going to be part of my answer. So the new HAPPENS report, Health and Air Policy in New Zealand report, calculates for the first time the social and health impacts from transport emissions, which can be folded into business cases down to at the district level, not at the project level, in a way that we haven't been able to do before in transport planning. So that's the MOT is aware of that, Whakamutunga is aware of that, and there are people actively working on folding that information into the investments that get made.
Can I just ask you, will that enable more funding to come from, or reallocation of funding from a socialised health model to potentially more of a socialised transport model to then enable us to do the things that people are wanting?
The government policy statement will set those buckets, and it's unclear at the moment how much will be put towards behaviour change or incentives or working with people, or how that will be signalled.
We seem to gallop towards the finish line here, and we've got 3 more people: Ian, Vicky, and then Nick.
Thank you, Peter. Look, the way I read your research is that it actually verifies my own opinion, which is that people's commitment to doing the right things for emissions is pretty skin thin, in that they say they want to do stuff, but they actually don't want to do it. And we had in a submission we had to our long-term plan, I think it was a earnest girl who lived in New Brighton who wanted a free bus to go to her work at Lincoln. And I thought if you live in urban Christchurch, you couldn't live further apart. But she thought she would save the planet by getting a free bus. And I just thought that this was sort of pretty average answers. But that seems to be what everybody here is saying, isn't it? That they actually have an expectation that the solution to curbing our emissions in terms of transport is actually still allowing, is still expecting that they can transport themselves anywhere they want to go. But they've transformed the mode by mode by which they power their vehicles or public transport. And if I can just make because you'll only let me one. So the other part was when you were talking about your rural survey, it sounded to me from the answers that you talked to urban people who lived in outlying urban centres rather than genuinely rural people, because none of the answers were rural people answering, apart from when you got onto utes.
Right. Well, I can assure you we absolutely did talk to rural businesses and farmers as well. The first part of the answer is really complex because across a whole range of indicators, there has been a clear attitudinal shift in how people think about environmental sustainability, and there's been much less change in their behaviour. What this research indicates is people think that their personal agency, their ability to impact their transport choices is difficult in their current circumstances without some systemic help, right? So the idea of actually one way I could reduce my emissions is if we had better broadband connectivity, in my neighbour, in our area.
Or ship to live next to me.
Yes.
Yeah, just to comment to Ian's point there, I remember that young woman and she lived in New Brighton with her partner. So potentially she could have separated to go and live nearer to where she worked and studied, but that may not have, that has other implications. So we're not all lucky enough to be born where we also work and live on a, have a farmhouse with a farm around it and all live and work in the same place. Anyway, moving on from that. Just saying. But moving on from that.
We've got 1 minute, Vicky. Got 1 minute. Push a button.
In terms of the carpooling one, so I noticed in here lots of people talk about sport, for example. My experience in New Zealand with kids and sport and going to places is there seems to be a mindset where it's fine to have kids come into your car to travel to a sport venue, but if you have 2 car seats spare, you probably wouldn't take the parent and their child to go to the sport venue together as a whole. It's sort of like the car is our family private space and we'll allow someone who's under 15 in there, but not anyone else. And I just, and I find, I mean, in the UK, I was carpooling with 4 other adults. We had a really good website network around our region where we could see who was going from where to where, complete strangers, pull together. We got a good car park option as a carpool group. And so it was all very much motivated, and I've subsequently even seen there's a comedy drama that's been written specifically around carpooling. So there's obviously been a real shift in sort of attitude to carpooling in the UK, whereas if still, I think New Zealand is not quite there. And so I guess my question is how could you best sort of G up and speed up that process of moving to a whole new sort of mindset and concept around, private car or whatever? Is there a quick fix there to catch up?
So the answer, the really short answer is there isn't. And so our company did the research for Whakamutunga on the northern corridor where carpooling was one of the proposed solutions. And Christchurch people are just not interested in carpooling at all. I don't know why that is. But if you think about it from a psychological lens, you start at the other end, which is what's the problem you're trying to solve? Not for you, the people, right? So you've got to remember that. If you have a public good obligation here. But actually, if you're thinking about individual customers, what's in it, individual consumers, what's in it for them? Right? And what Christchurch people tell you is there's not much in carpooling for them.
And I think in the transport emissions reduction context and the behaviour change context, the the questions we think of and ask today are very much like if you were in the 1950s and 60s and asking people about smoking. The solutions are culturally different than the solutions we look at today for smoking. So I think that's important to bear in mind, is that things like car share, carpooling, they will be increasingly, as we go through the next 30 years and transition to a zero emissions transport system, part of those future solutions. The research is a snapshot in time as to what people perceive right now as what their immediate needs are. They want to shift what can we do in the 10-year time frame of the regional land transport plan, and folding up into the national land transport plan to kind of enable that change. But it's a 30-year vision, and it's a massive behaviour change cost.
Thank you. Thank you. I've had more comment today than questions, actually. It's probably about 95% comment and 5% questions. I've got two more people that want to speak. Nick, Greg, you be brief.
Very brief. So in this space of trying to be more, reducing our emissions, are you actually taking into account that to make that EV car takes 5 times more the environmental footprint than making the petrol powered car? Because I've seen research from America which says that, and unless you're doing 50,000 k's a year in an EV, you might as well have a engine based car.
So the vehicles themselves, the responsibility for that sits at the national level. So we're kind of agnostic, if you like, in terms of the regional land transport plan and the behaviour change in terms of the vehicle itself and the sustainability of that vehicle or its energy sources or the waste. It's more about the people and the freight and the general network across Canterbury. And we're aware of such rapid technological change in a lot of spaces as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, as an ex-rugby league coach of an under-11 side in 1980, where I could, in my Volkswagen Beetle, carry 8 kids to a game, would it be fair to say that regulation may have had a major impact upon carpooling within Aotearoa?
I'm glad you were the last comment, because that's the best comment that we've had all day. And I think that we'll take that to the Ministry of Transport, see if we can get changed to the seatbelt laws and a whole lot of things. So thank you. Thank you. Sorry, James. Look, we've come to the end of this. I'll put this, we've got a recommendation here to receive this report. We'll just go through this process and then, James, you're on. So could somebody please move that? Thank you, Greg. Seconder. Thank you, Genevieve. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, that is carried. All right. To be fair to you, James, we need to give you a reasonable approach at this. We've got what James has got to say, and can I just sort of shoehorn you into some timing here? I'm thinking like 20 to 25 minutes, James. Is that enough?
Oh, I'm sure we can get you back on track. Not a problem. The finance piece is never as interesting as the social science piece, so it's always less questions. Do you want to out?
Yes, so part of the statutory responsibility in developing the regional land transport plan is to consider broader funding options for the whole transport system. And as part of that process, we contracted Gemelli to do a bit of an environment scan and kind of look at what those options might be. And that was provided to all of the councils in the region. And so this is a run through of that. So James, you're the director of Gemelli Consulting, and you take an innovative lens to sort of urban spaces, housing, transport, funding systems, which is why we brought Gemelli on board. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire, and kia ora koutou councillors. So as Claire said, Carl's clearly identified the nature of the beast and the drive to change. There's a lot of solutions out there that can be used. We're not specifically looking at the actual solutions per se today, but looking at how they could potentially be funded or financed across the piece. So there's been numbers floating around in order to see that magnitude of shift that the council is tasked with enabling is around about $1 billion worth of capital investment required over the next decade.
The problem definition is essentially that adding $1 billion onto the ratepayer base each quarter is not going to be sustainable or palatable from a councillor or ratepayer's perspective. Traditional debt is likely to hit ceilings, and obviously the NLTF and the central government purse is under increasing pressure as well. So looking at other ways to raise capital in order to drive those changes is what we were tasked with looking at doing. That's the bad news, is that there's $1 billion, challenge. The good news is that essentially the rest of the world is probably a decade or two more advanced with us in using capital in order to advance change on transport and other things. So there's some great examples that can be referred to in order to pave the way and provide assurance to councillors. So we looked at 10 options. We looked at grants, we looked at traditional bonds with debt, we looked at green bonds, social impact bonds, payment for outcomes contracts, public-private partnerships, land value capture tax, road pricing initiatives, and value for money assessments. So we looked at each of those and had an assessment on how palatable they would be, how effective they would be in order to achieve the outcomes you're looking to achieve. We've mapped those, and similar to Carl's sort of window of innovation. It's really hard to see on the screen there, but down the left-hand side, you've got the things that are typically used in your environment at the moment. So rates, debts, government contributions, value for money assessments, those sorts of things are sitting down the left-hand or typical side. As you move to the right-hand side, you get to more innovative options, green bonds, payment for outcomes, PPPs. So these are more innovative and complex options that aren't typically used in the toolkit currently. But as I noted before, other countries overseas and other entities and authorities overseas have used these well to see behavioural change made. So we'll take you for a quick walk, and it will be a quick walk on this piece here, on these 10, and we've got some recommendations on which ones potentially have got more applicability and could be worthy of further investigation. So green bonds are obviously similar to traditional bonds or traditional debt, but they come from a different type of investor, a type of investor that wants to see a financial dividend, but also an environmental dividend out there. And in exchange for that environmental dividend, they're willing to offer up a discounted return or a discounted interest rate from your perspective, or they might be willing to invest in projects with a higher degree of risk across there. So typically they come at a lower cost of capital than traditional debt, which means that your impact on your ratepayer is less, as they're the ones that are paying the interest principal along the way. Auckland Council's raised $1 billion of green bonds since 2018, so they're not entirely new to the New Zealand market, but they are pretty much in their infancy. And what's commonplace overseas is that they're really nicely tied to large-scale infrastructure projects with a revenue stream. So that makes it really nice and easy to raise the capital when there's a revenue stream there. And some very high-level thinking that we've done around those are, if you wanted to shift all of the public transport to electric, that would obviously come at a large capital cost. Could that be wrapped up in a green bond? A capital cost associated with a shared bike fleet or a hydrogen truck fleet would also cover a large capital cost, but would have revenue streams to it. There's some really neat examples. Carl touched on them around incentivising office workers to travel to work differently. There's some great examples overseas where development finance has been given to property developers, block developers that have put in more showers, more bike parks, and they've been able to access cheaper debt in exchange for incentivising people to travel to work other than solo transport. Social impact bonds are a really neat mechanism. 2 of these have been done in New Zealand to date, and they're essentially a contract between you as the public sector and a third-party provider. And in a similar way to the green bonds, the interest rate is lower, but it gets lower the better they perform in there. So the third-party provider is in control, essentially, of what interest rate they perform. So there's a great incentive mechanism there. So the incentive is on the third-party provider to perform and therefore get a lower interest rate. So essentially using capitalism for good in order to incentivise them. A couple of examples have been done in health and justice in New Zealand, which are really exciting. One of them was with a mental health provider who was looking at getting people back into employment. They obviously were they had facilities, they had large capital costs, they had treatment centres, and they had to borrow to get those. And their borrowing rate, their interest rate dropped, the higher their rate of getting their clientele back into work was. So there was data around when people went back into work, and their interest rate was linked to that. So they were obviously incentivized to get as many people back into work. So there's an outcome that's being purchased there through an interest rate. So this really works when you've got a degree of delegated control. I'm definitely not proposing this, but just to provide an example, if instead of saying to Metro, we'd like you to drive on this route and pick up people when they were there, the same example would be to say to a public transport provider, we're giving you this money, and we're giving you the contract. You go and invest in the fleet, and the number of people that come onto the bus, that will dictate your interest rate that you're paying there. So the number of people that get onto the buses, or the reduction in congestion at different times of day, that would be dependent, the depending factor that would decide what their interest rate was. So it puts them in control. It might be your advertising budget that goes to them in order to incentivize those. So it's a long way down the innovative framework. Payment for outcomes contracts are similar to social impact bonds like we've talked about, but they're for operating costs, not for capital costs. So they are, again, focusing your third-party providers on outcomes as opposed to just providing inputs or outputs. So it's smart contracting in that sense there. And so these sorts of projects need really clearly specified outcomes so you can actually measure them and have a contract, so you're not tied up in the courts and in disputes around whether they've achieved their contracts or not. But for some projects, these work really, really well. Public transport could be another good example of those, or a car share scheme could be another really good example of those based on the utilisation rates that the provider unlocks. Land value capture tax have not been done in New Zealand. They're being discussed for Auckland's light rail system, but are commonplace overseas. And essentially, they recognise that when the public sector invests in some areas, the private sector get a free uplift. And it's essentially saying, hang on, we're investing $1 billion in light rail. If we're putting a station around your development, you're going to get a 20% uplift because of the result of public sector investment. Is that fair? There's a pretty strong argument that it's not. The developer hasn't done anything well to get that gain. So it's grabbing some of that gain each year and saying, great, we're going to use that to actually pay for the infrastructure. So it's a really nice mechanism. People are paying a premium to live close to a station, and therefore their rent or their home costs more than that as a result. As I said, it suits really nicely with light rail or mass rapid transport system. A big caveat there, it's a new thing.
My question with this is, what's the difference between that and us paying? So in the Ashburton district, 85% of our rates we pay to the district council go into the roading based on our capital value. What's the difference between that and this?
Yeah, no, good question. It's probably a more targeted one because not everyone is going to be using light rail systems. So your land value isn't going to go up as much as it would because some people are still going to be driving in that sense there. So if light rail was the only transport system you could use, the prices would go up really, really high around there, and then rates would be a really sensible way of collecting the revenue associated with that. But because other people have other means of transport, you're going to have a dilution in that property uplift as a result. So it's going to be a far more efficient way of capturing it.
No, you missed my point. The point is that our capital values, because we rate local authorities rate on capital value. Capital values already take into account their connectivity to the rest of the world, and therefore the closer you are, or the better strategic position your property is on, the higher your value, and therefore you're paying more rates. So aren't we already paying that tax? Well, it will be true in urban areas. No, you're not.
Opportunity, isn't it, around mass?
It is. It's a more targeted, accurate way of capturing the full value. Absolutely agree that rating values or rating on a value basis will capture some of that. This is it's a far more effective and efficient way of capturing all of the uplift, or a greater degree of the uplift. So the second to last one that we've got there is around road pricing. So relatively common in New Zealand. Toll roads, not so much in the south, but up north. It's a good way of, essentially, it's user pays. So it's an equity argument here. If you want to drive on a certain route, you pay for the privilege to do that. You contribute towards the capital and operating costs of that road. Congestion charging hasn't been done in New Zealand, but obviously is commonplace in some large cities across the world. And again, is a more targeted user pays arrangement and a really efficient way of driving behaviour change. If you want to travel at a certain time of day, you pay a higher toll. If you want to travel at an off-peak time of day, you don't pay that toll, or you pay a less toll. So there's options there to be considered. So these options have been taken and recommendations have been taken to the Regional Transport Committee. The ones that were discussed and were suggested for taking forward were green bonds, social impact bonds, payment for outcomes contracting, land value capture tax, congestion charging, and value for money assessments. So this has been a high-level desktop scan of what options are out there, what things could you put on the buffet to consider, and the recommendation from the RTC was delving deeper into each of those 6, looking at what sort of costs would it take to implement, what sort of timing, what sort of revenues could you receive from them, the legislative environment, and what would need to happen from an internal policy perspective. And then on top of that, drawing on what are those international examples, looking at what's worked really well overseas and what hasn't worked well overseas, and what might be more appropriate for both a rural and an urban context across Canterbury.
James, Ian, do you want to double into that subject again? Do you want to talk about that subject again? That land capture tax?
No, Dion told me that he's going to tax me so many times, but it'll all be fair in the long run.
Given the fact that we've had discussion for some time now about the National Land Transport Fund and the not the lack of funding, but the paucity of funding, I guess, that's going in there. And you know, we had a conversation about, so what is the South Island getting? I think you might have brought that up. But this is an opportunity for us to actually take some of that back into our own space. One of the things that's interesting is, and I'm not too sure where the Petitions model is going to get before this government ends, but that's an opportunity to have a look at like green bonds. Would you change all your buses? Because, you know, we looked at that, you know, the nitrous, what's the bad gas? Nitrous. Yeah, so we've looked at that and said, well, you know, if we were going to do Riccarton Road and we're going to mash rapid transport down Riccarton Road, it'd have to be all, you couldn't put traditional down there. So those are the opportunities. Yeah.
Look, I would make some comments, because this is sort of long-term vision. And it seems to me that if you have a long-term vision about transport, then you need to stop discussing transport emissions, because within 25 years, we won't have vehicles that emit. So references to electrifying the fleets and saving people's lives, or, you know, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, will be something that will be a debate that everybody said, oh yeah, that was an issue 30 years ago, and it won't be an issue in 30 years' time. I'd be interested to see how you could get a congestion charge now for Tynwald, because that's clearly one of the most congested spots in Canterbury. And it seems to me that yeah, my comments about the land value tax you're proposing, that would have to be extremely land value capture tax. You'd have to be pretty smart about the way you apply that, because if it just becomes another tax on capital value, then it's
Can I just comment on that? We spent a fair bit of time south of Rakaia today talking about the issues that they face. But the issues that we face are the ones that are in front of us and the statutes that are on the books now, and what it looks like we're going to have to do as a regional transport committee. And I'm not disagreeing with you, Councillor McKenzie, about the fact that we should take a long-term view of that. But actually, we're only starting to put our thinking around what we need to do. And this is a real key part of that, because it gives you another option. We've been sitting here like birds in the nest, you know, waiting for mum to come home, the National Land Transport Fund. If it's not going to have no money in it, well, how are we going to go? What are we going to do? And so that's strategically our job. So anybody else want to make a comment?
I think it's really important we discuss the non-driving pensioners of Iperton and what we can do for them. We can't just concentrate on the city.
Anybody got anything of any substance to say, or a substantive question to ask James? Look, I think, James, we won't prolong this too much longer, because I think that the RTC have seen this. They've given some direction to what they require to be done, and there you picked up on that. So we will get on and do that. I think Environment Canterbury itself has to look at the proposals that you've got in terms of what effect they have. And I know there is a piece of work, I think, being led by yourself, Giles, on that. So we'll look forward to seeing what that advice is. Great.
Now, I've just got a question about like I can see where all these ideas are going, but I'm thinking about what we heard. I know you didn't hear this, James, but from Tim Jarvis last week, and of course you can see if we're going to decarbonise fleets and all this sort of stuff, that energy production becomes pretty important, energy generation, and this might be coming in our investment stuff as well. But I'm really interested in how and if we should go into that space as a regional council in terms of some of the land we use or biomass production energy. So interesting.
No, I think it's a really good point, and a big fan of Tim Jarvis's thinking around alternative fuels and things like that. And I think history has sort of shown that, you know, the public sector needs to take a leadership role in things like this. And one of the ways that it can do that is by enabling the private sector who might be exploring those things and providing low cost capital is a really simple way of doing that. The council can borrow at a cheaper rate than, you know, NTDX can, and it might be taking a partnership approach on that basis as a really baseline approach.
So it's got any comments or any questions to ask? And if, Vicky.
Yeah, mate, there's a comment. You did say a comment was allowed. Just in terms, so in the report, it talks about a targeted rate to raise $1 billion over 10 years. Now, I don't know if where that is that billion. I don't know if that billion is just plucked out of the air as a big figure, or if it's something specific, maybe the MRT, for example.
So that billion came up in the transport officers group, must be well about a year ago or so, and it was in the context of the green paper on emissions reduction and the level of shift that was being indicated, and the current regional land transport plan being around 5 billion, and so $1 billion is about a 20% increase, and so a 20% increase is likely to be the amount of money that might get proposed for the next RLTP. So we're trying to zip it all together, but at that point we didn't have the specific costs and solutions, but it's multiple streams. Yeah.
What I want to say, so great if we can find some fixes to that, you know, bring in some other streams of revenue other than just rates to bring something into that billion. But at the same time, when it comes down to $335 per rating unit is what this paper's proposing, in reality, that's a fraction of the cost of having a car on your drive. And when we have a car per head, and you think many rating units have 2 cars per property, if you could cut that, provide enough of an infrastructure around public transport to get rid of a car per property, and actually you can be quids in and have the decarbonised transport. If you can pitch that right and market it right, and, you know, talking to behaviour change before, that isn't actually such a completely dramatic and outrageous and out there figure. So that's my comment.
Thanks, Jed. Just a quick comment. Yeah, this report, thank you very much for that, because it gave the Regional Transport Committee a lot of impetus for discussion. And really what this report is saying is that there's no one way to fund whatever, and that we have a range of options that we can choose depending on the future policy direction that we might want to take. Could be this one over here or this one over here. So I think that from my perspective, that's a really good thing, that we've got some good background information on where we could go.
I'll move.
Oh, so the recommendation is the ad has been notified council, seconded by councillor Woods.
Hold on, can you go back to the? No. I just want you to go back to where we were before, because I actually don't know. Yes, sir. I will ask a question. I don't know what the recommendation is number 2, it says undertake further detailed investigation on the financing options or something like that. But in the slide that was just up before, I think it had those.
I don't understand what you're saying. Yeah, so this is a repeat of that presentation. Are you happy enough, Councillor Swift? No. So moved by Councillor Davies, seconded by Councillor Burns. Is there any other discussion? Genevieve?
More just a comment. I support what Craig said just before about alternative methods for energy and investing in that. You know, the concept of that. Yeah, Tim Jarvis had quite a big impact on my thoughts as well. So yeah, I really strongly support that.
But thanks for that. With that, if there's no further comment, put the motion that's there. Councillor Davies and Councillor Burns, all those in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say no. That is carried. Thank you, James. Again, we've caused a bit of debate, which is good, and increased our understanding of what's ahead of us. So thank you for that. We'll go to 8.6, which is Claire. Do you want to go through this, Claire, or are you happy to take this read, or where are you at with it?
Yeah, I'll just make a key point around the scale and pace of change towards emissions reduction. So this is this paper is about the strategic framework that was presented to the Regional Transport Committee that will inform the development of the Regional Land Transport Plan. Where we're at the moment in transport is a pivot point from a system that's been running for, I don't know, a century, and trying to pivot within the next 10 years towards building the system that'll run for the next century. We don't have the data because the data that's been collected is about the previous system. And it's largely focused on commute because that's where a lot of the investment goes in your traditional transport and urban development planning and investment. So as you've heard, behaviour change is a massive part of this. From what we can tell from the Transport 2035 website, which has been provided by the Minister, by Whakamutunga, which is informed by the evidence from census and household travel surveys and all of the information that they, the national data sets, that what it sort of looked like to achieve a 41% reduction in transport emissions within the timeframes by 2035 would be something like double walking, double cycling, double public transport uptake. Of those remaining trips, a further 25% reduction in the trips taken. And then of those remaining trips to have double car occupancy and 30% of the fleet being a zero emissions fleet. So I think it's important when we're talking air quality transport and urban development that there are air quality transport, air quality co-benefits, but in terms of the GHG emissions and the embodied emissions, the number of vehicles has to decrease over time as the population grows. So that's part of the shift. It's not a transport system where it's like we are now, but nothing coming out the tailpipe. It's got to include those embedded emissions. The scale and pace of change within that kind of by 2035 is a similar amount of shift in travel behaviour as what was seen in level 3 lockdown. So it's a significant behaviour change piece by 2035, which is why behaviour change is now quite a key issue for transport.
Thank you for that very informative view on this, and it doesn't make me happy to think we're going to have to try and do all that really quickly. Ian.
Sorry, what Kaz just said is dependent on still continued use of diesel and petrol vehicles. But by 2035, there'll be an expectation that there'll be a significant shift there will have been a significant shift to electric vehicles, in which case a lot of your premises no longer stand.
That's included in the model.
In the model, what proportion of electric vehicles do you expect people to be driving by 2035?
Based on the current rate of uptake, including the Clean Car Scheme discount, 30%.
I thought given the rate of manufacture of the technology change, and then the fact that by 2035, I think in quite a lot of international jurisdictions, you won't be able to buy anything other than electric vehicles. That's a conservative estimate.
So in terms of the global car market and where that's shifting, and the production of vehicles, there are constraints in terms of how we achieve global emissions reduction, things like the supply of steel, and signals from the World Economic Forum to the big car manufacturers to scale back on car production. So we're wanting to ensure that our communities are resilient to those global changes, and ensure that our transport network stays up to date with our OECD partners and where they're heading with their transport networks, so that when tourists come or businesses are looking at New Zealand, that we have a similar transport system, and in the RLTP, it's looking at it across all of Canterbury, so that so we talk about shared prosperity in the framework, and that's around when you are travelling out to Kaikoura or Mackenzie or Hurunui, that it's a similar transport system, and it's not like in some countries where in the inner cities you've got a high quality system, and as you travel out it's like stepping back in time. So we're wanting to, we don't want that to happen as we do this kind of global pivot to a new transport system, but to keep our transport system up at pace with other countries.
So just sensible quotes, please, and opinions and questions. I mean, I think what Claire's doing is she's putting on the table nationally what it needs to be achieved. We know that the conversations that we're having, especially from a rural background, those things it's a really steep hill to go up to get to where we need to get to, and we understand that. But a change in that direction is something that the country needs to do, and we can only do what's in front of us now. The legislation that's in front of us now, we've got to do that. Now, if there's a change in that legislation, then that is a change for us. So, thank you, Claire, for putting that on the table. Claire.
Yeah, I mean, look, just a quick comment, because I can't help feeling the presentations we had, briefings we had this morning, whatever we call them, in this meeting, there is certainly a huge amount of change. And I do sit here and wonder about the equity between urban and our rural, provincial New Zealand, and particularly Canterbury, and thinking about all the stuff that has to be done. You know, energy, for example, is a classic I'll put down here. And, you know, we saw that our networks actually weren't very resilient in Northland and Hawke's Bay, where sometimes it's taken a fortnight or so to get electricity back. So what does this, how does that echo? What I want to know, the question I had would like to ask is around the engagement. We talk about that CRTC, Canterbury Regional Transport Council Committee, must have regard to the views of representative groups of land transport users and providers when carrying out the review. Does that include the wider community in there somehow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's yeah, okay.
That is got a transport officer, which represents the view of the different.
Right. So it's probably one of the most democratic committees in the whole place, because we do reach right back into those communities. So we have mayors from Kaikoura right down through to Waitaki. Do we take 100% responsibility to going into communities and talking to them about that? No, we don't. But that's their responsibility.
Fine with that answer, that all the voices are being heard if they're representing their communities. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have a better forums to discuss those things. So we've had freight strategy for the South Island. We've got a South Island Regional Transport Chairs group that we're trying to use that opportunity. We've invited Kiwi Rail to be part of that discussion because they're going to be part of the solution. We need to try and get direct access to the Minister, which we've asked the Minister for. We've asked the Minister to come and talk to us about solutions around the National Land Transport Fund. We're actually playing our part here. But what Claire's saying to you is nationally, this is what's expected of us. And I'm always frustrated on the fact that we haven't got the right levers to pull. We can't go and push cars off the road and stop them doing what they need to do. So it's a frustrating space. Vicky, then Genevieve.
Yeah, just on the connecting up more regionally, I'm just wondering, are we looking at intra and inter-regional bus network? I know the regional passenger rail would be fabulous, but it feels like that would be potentially a very long way away. What about with buses in that space?
In terms of the policy, we've used the word shared transport, so we can be sort of mode agnostic and allow the best solution to be developed that actually works for what technology is available at the time. There are things happening, like in China, there's I think about 3 towns that have autonomous electric trams that you kind of paint along the road, and then the autonomous tram travels down that, which could be like a train type thing. But so we didn't want to actually put words in that then tied to a solution, which might not actually be the best one once you get into the business case development. Something.
Just a quick question, really. Just mimicking what the EU is doing and phasing out diesel vehicles. Is New Zealand heading in the same direction, just to look at emissions? Because France right now, you can't actually buy a new diesel vehicle, and a lot of the pump stations do not deliver diesel anymore.
So in terms of the central government documents that I've read around decarbonisation, there isn't anything signalled at the moment in terms of preventing the purchase of or use of types of vehicles that I'm aware of.
Last comment from Grant, and then we'll shift on to 8.7.
It's just a quick comment. I always think sometimes these things are, and I'm looking at your next steps, item 44, that talks about a strategic framework being developed by the Transport Managers Officers Group. And it was really clear in the development of the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan that a real wider interdisciplinary approach to the management of urban areas and transport had to mesh together really well. Do we have an interdisciplinary mix in this Transport Officers Group? Do we have urban designers and planners as part of that group, or is it a siloed arrangement?
At the moment, it's just the transport staff. There is capacity issues for a lot of the small councils to participate, which in somewhere like Greater Christchurch, there's more capacity within the councils.
I suppose I'm thinking in terms of broadening the conversation, and it may actually come out of the GPS, where the government's looking at perhaps a different way of looking at some of the transportation issues. And
yep. Oh, sorry, Grant.
What we've got. So it's pulling. What I'm supposed to. Are you pulling in other disciplines to assist in the development of a strategic approach to transport and tying that in with urban growth?
I think so. We're not at the moment. We haven't been resourced to. We've kind of been. Transport has traditionally always been an enabler of travel anywhere, everywhere, and in this pivot, I think there's a greater recognition that actually to achieve some of these transport targets does require bringing in people from different disciplines more into the transport space. But that's kind of not intentional at the moment. It's emerging practice. So it depends a lot on the existing resources.
Oh, through Mr. Chair, just a quick comment. I think as we move into regional spatial planning across Canterbury, I think this is where the opportunity is similar to what we've had in Greater Christchurch, is this land use and transport integration piece. Really looking at where is growth, where is our resilience, our hazards, all of the different constraints, etc. That will, what's our future for Canterbury look like? So I think that you'll see a lot more work in this space. The next RLTP, while we'll have a new GPS and we'll have new direction in that space, it is a bit of a business as usual as far as constructing an RLTP goes. This is only a midterm review. The next RLTP is the full review of the RLTP, and that'll be the real opportunity, I think, to do that more integrated land use, transport, climate change, a whole range of other elements that come into it, as you know, from the Greater Christchurch spatial planning work.
Thank you. I'm going to call this to an end now. We're running out of time. We're going to have to stop at 3 o'clock for a break. We've still got another paper to do, and people have got things to do at 3 o'clock. So we're running really short on time. Would someone like to move that? Thank you, Grant. And seconded by Genevieve. Thank you, Genevieve. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against. That is carried. Thank you very much. So we go to our last item, and it's Pip and I think, is it you, Stuart? Jesse and Stuart. There's Pip in the room. Come on up, Pip. Good to see you. I don't know. We might run a wee bit after 3, but there we go. Been pulled off by Oliver.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. Through your chair, just the purpose of this paper is to update the committee on the progress of the air quality transport and urban development portfolio. Pip Moore is our principal management advisor for the portfolio. Pip was the author of the paper with input from myself, Stuart, and also Brian Reeves that you heard from earlier as the Clean Air program lead. The paper, I'll just take it as read. There's a number of updates there in the table, and also a number of notable recent achievements and issues that are affecting the portfolio. Just a couple of things that I would note. We just touched on the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, the Hui Hui Mai engagement, received over 7,000 responses to the survey. So it's phenomenal engagement on that process. So I just wanted to make that as a highlight. And also the VKT reduction piece that's referenced there, we've lodged that with Whakamutunga, seeking some additional funding, very much in the same space as what we've been talking today around behaviour change, reducing travel, emissions reduction, etc. So we've put forward a bid through to Whakamutunga and central government for funding for that work as part of the Greater Christchurch transport planning work we're doing. So I'm not sure if there's anything else that Stuart might want to add, but otherwise we're both happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Look, I think if councillors have got questions, we'll do questions rather than comments. Thanks. So Vicky, and then.
So in terms of the bullet point under note of achievements, one up from the bottom about the cruise ships and the paper tickets. It said that 90% of passengers are buying those. Does that mean that the cruise ship passengers make up 90% of the patronage on the 28th during those cruise ship times, or is it 90% of the cruise ship passengers are buying those tickets? I wasn't quite clear which.
Yes, so 90% of the cruise ship passengers are buying the day passes and travelling on the alternative buses that have been put in place. So there are still cruise ship customers travelling on the 28th, and on occasion the 28 is still overloaded. But 90% of the cruise ship customers are buying a day pass to travel on one of those two services.
When you say the alternative, so you mean our extra bits of service that we've put on, you're not talking about the shuttle buses as the alternative that the cruise companies put on. Okay. And do you have a sense of what proportion of passengers are cruise ship passengers compared with, the total? We've got some locals and then cruise ships. Do you have a sense of just how much the cruise ship passengers are making up of the total?
So around about 10% of cruise ships passenger list is travelling into the city.
not on a commercial service.
The mention of Route 17, it's good news that we've got the deployment now scheduled for September this year. Is that the date that also that 125 will cease currently going to the airport? Well, inside the airport terminal? Is that still going to coincide?
So at the moment, once the 17 and 28 services, new services are turned on, the 125 will still go to the airport, but not to the airport terminal. So it will use the Orchard Road stop outside the Antarctic Centre.
So we've got till we've got till September to sort that one out. And then the Route 7 corridor enhancements. It says there that the work has been paused while staff attend to more immediate matters. When is that looking likely to be started, and when would, because I'm getting a lot of questions from that community about what's going on, so, and I have no idea, so I'd like to understand.
Yes, the public transport team is overwhelmed with work at the moment, and so that's one of the tasks that we would normally be doing now but aren't. So when we get some headspace, we'll be able to focus on that activity. I don't have a time frame for that at this point.
Will it be this year, next year, 2025? Like, I need to give some answers to these people who have been promised this for like a year, or at least 6 months.
Sorry, I don't know if we will go into that right here. Do we need to go into that definitive date right here today in this meeting? Yeah, I know you'd like to know, but is this the right place to do that? If you've got an idea of what that might be, but we're not being absolute in accounts. I don't want us to be absolute if you're not certain.
What I am certain about is that the funding for delivery of a Route 7 uplift is in the long-term plan for year 1 of the next long-term plan. That's where it currently sits. But the work to do the service review and engagement, I can't give a definitive time when that's going to start.
By that, Councillor Sweeps. I beg your pardon? Oh, yeah, well, we're all frustrated by what we're trying to do here, but I just don't think that we need to, let me do a pun here, throw Stuart under a bus. Grant.
Thanks, team, for a really good report, and it's the description of what we've been doing. It's pretty impressive, really, over the last little while. I've got 3 very short questions related to the page 104, the spreadsheet. One of them was related to the public transport reserves figures for the difference in figures between June 2023 and June 2024, where there is expenditure of 2 million on the business as usual PT operating reserve. I just wondered, the 2 million, what was that? Where does that go to?
So the expenditure that's planned in the year 3 annual plan to use the PT reserves is to offset reduced revenue through COVID impacts. So because we're carrying these passengers, well, we'd forecast to carry these passengers in year 3, that accounts for that revenue shortfall. The second use of the reserves funding is the local share component of the fare trial that Council approved last year, and in particular the tertiary concession component of that fare trial. It's useful to note also with the reserve that its primary purpose is to protect Environment Canterbury from fiscal shock from unplanned events. And so one of those unplanned fiscal shocks in year 3 will be the quantum of inflation rate, particularly in the transport space, currently running at 8%. So if inflation continues on its current path, we will see a demand on our reserves of between $500,000 to $3 million to maintain our current service.
Question, just below that fare box recovery, what's the anticipated usual figure for fare box recovery in terms of our overall budget as a percentage?
So prior to COVID, our fare box was running at 37%. Obviously, COVID has had an impact on our patrons, and therefore our fare revenue is reduced, and thus fare box will reduce. If we assume that the 50% fares stops in June, when it's currently intended to be stopped, the end of June, and our fare trial commences, then our fare box will be around this number going forward, because our fare revenue will have reduced due to reduced fares.
Last question, related to Super Gold Card patronage. It's good to see there's been an increase, but I'm just wondering, in the orange boxes above that blue line, there's a reference to an assessment of peak, afternoon peak between 3 o'clock and 6:30. And given that we've removed the restrictions on timeframes for elderly, do we know what it might be in terms of overall, from previously where we had the 3 o'clock, we now go to whenever?
So looking at that chart, the first thing to look at is the blue line, which shows patronage from the previous year for Super Gold. And then if we look at the yellow bars, that shows Super Gold patronage for the original hours that were operating, which included that segment of time where Super Gold customers paid the 3:30 to 3 to 6:30 in the first part of the graph, March through to June. Then we introduced the free travel for that period, and so the orange piece on top of the yellow bar shows that component of patronage, which identifies that more people are travelling in that window now than had done in the past.
Last comment or question from Councillor Karakia.
Kia ora. Hey, just on the Māori focus area, I see that you're actually referencing Te Pai Mahutonga. What is, so, and obviously, if I think it's the same one, is this from Mason Jury's? Okay, so is that being referenced, back through because that's not part of the Mahanui management plan, is it?
So this is the framework that the community and public health advisors support us in applying. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this. I'm going to cut it short now and ask that we're going to move for that recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Sunkel, seconded by Councillor Ward. Is there any further discussion? There being no further discussion, I'll put that matter. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, and that is carried. So thank you very much, councillors and staff, for the discussion today. Thank you, Pip. Didn't get much opportunity to have a say, but it's nice to see you at the table. And thank you, Claire and Stuart and Jess. The next meeting of the Transport Urban Development Air Quality Committee will be on the 14th of June 2023 at 10:30. And now I would ask if Councillor Korako could finish us with a karakia.
Mo te committee koina ho. So the translation there is the Transport, Urban Development and Air Quality Committee. Ako tēnei karakia Whakamutunga e hui hui e takata. Ke tau ki tātou ki tō tātou whai o tō tātou e riki o karaiti e taroha tātua e te whiwhina teitanga wairua tapu ake tōna atu. Āmene.